Hello everybody, and welcome to another installment from the Central Coalition. Today we're going to have a look at the question of why government? Why have government? Many an anarchist or rebellious youth would say it is an unnecessary burden on society, on personal freedom. But most who are not blinded by passion or rage subconsciously feel the need for social order, as this in turn is driven by a very primal goal: physical safety. Only when we portray government in its most basic form does this subconscious connection fully make sense. Government is, for lack of a better term, a protection racket. You pay a fee, taxes, and the government is supposed to increase your safety by the threat of force against those who don't toe the line. And just like any other protection racket, your choice to not partake in this system is highly limited and fraught with danger. National security, law enforcement, the judiciary, roads, healthcare, education. Despite all of the other additions to government throughout history, this promise of physical security is still at the core of the modern complex apparatus. And this is what has the largest sway in generating our subconscious feeling towards authority in general. Historically speaking, this core function is much more easily visible when looking back throughout time, when the threat of external invasion was considerably higher and the extensive system and services of modern government were not yet the norm. This also explains why those in power continuously seek to expand their power and continue to centralize more power over time, and for the seeming tolerance of the masses for this to happen. Quite simply because the larger the protection racket, the safer you are within it. All elements of how the protection racket being run being equal. This perception of safety and the subconscious recognition that this is government's primary role has heavily influenced people's motivation throughout time. Physical safety being the primary necessity for our subconscious driving desire to increase our control over our own lives. This has helped shape people's tolerances and intolerances. Modern organized crime and warlords of failed states are more simplistic variants of this need for physical safety, and are still visible today. The threat of death and violence is still the primary motivator for people's actions. The statement, "the quality of a person is shown by what they don't do even when they know they can get away with it," indicates the brutality that is simmering just below the surface in a disturbing percentage of the population, held in check only by the idea of a functioning state, of the potential repercussions that their unrestrained actions might cause. Some of the clearest views on the true nature and role of government can be seen by those who fought against the worst excesses and generally tried to create a new form of it, free of the errors they had observed in their time. The Founding Fathers of America. It is quite ironic that their predecessors would go on to not only completely ignore these warnings, but actively attempt to steer against them under the guise of betterment. Here are just a few. Government is not reason, it is not eloquence, it is force. Like fire, it is a dangerous servant and a fearful master. Any society that would give up a little liberty to gain a little security will deserve neither and lose both. I believe there are more instances of the abridgment of the freedom of the people by gradual and silent encroachment of those in power than by violent and sudden usurpations. Experience has shown that even under the best forms of government, those entrusted with power have, in time and by slow operation, perverted it into tyranny. There are just too many good ones to put down here, but I would highly recommend you go have a look. It is worth your time. In these quotes we see the clearest indication of the major issues. The excessive centralization of power quickly loses its benefits in guarding against external abuse by becoming the primary source of abuse from within. It has only been through the gradual erosion and infiltration of corruption, driven by the desire of individuals to gain influence and power over others, if initially for good or bad, that even this noble beginning has regressed and stagnated like all the other attempts before it. This clearly shows the negative side of the moral dualism that is our core desire for self-determination, the willingness to increase one's own perceived freedom at the cost of others. If not directly through law, then indirectly through taxes, the labour of all of us is less and less in our own control and in the hands of a centralised bureaucracy that dictates to the masses what they are to do, thus limiting our economic freedom and choice. The main gain of centralisation was always been greater security from external threat, though often enough this has also been the facilitator. Now that we are at a point of functioning international security arrangements, alliances, this necessity to be big on your own has reduced. The majority of modern secular law is common law implemented across borders. In terms of setting the rules of life, the rights of individuals have become relatively uniform in large parts of the world. Decentralization of taxation and therefore economic power is the key goal for hindering corruption and power-mongering by increasing transparency and reducing complexity. This idea of growing regional fiscal independence does not include any military independence, as this was truly the main positive benefit of centralization in the past, at least for most modern democracies. One of the main gains of decentralization is greater transparency. The money trail and decision process are more regional and, through a simple reduction in scale, easier to follow. All systems of power are inherently prone to drawing people who would like to take advantage of this power for their own gain. The more transparent the mechanisms of power, as well as the people in it, the less open to abuse the system is. Unnecessary complexity is one of the main bastions of hidden misdeeds. Thus, the need to decentralize to break down the mechanism into more manageable parts. Quite simply put, the only part of government that needs to be national or federal is defence. The vast majority of all other functions are just as well handled, if not better, on a state or regional level. With this I want to highlight that reducing the scope of government, or smaller government in general, is only one component of what is needed. One needs to reduce the area of influence as well. This is important that not only the system becomes transparent, but also the people within it. As individuals are given more power over others, this must be offset by a relinquishment of freedom to balance this gained power. Specifically the right to privacy during and after their time in power, as well as restriction of interactions with any business for which the decisions, while in office, would have had influence on. Just as there should be no rights without responsibility, there should be no responsibility, power, without voluntary sacrifice in rights to offset this. This is the only way to ensure that those seeking no personal gain attain positions of power, because these positions require a nominal sacrifice of freedom, of interaction and privacy that makes corruption in any form a large risk for little reward. No matter the type of government, democratic, communist, monarch or other, it is a system of government, the inherent concentration of power and its tendency to ever expand this influence that needs to be addressed. As long as the people have the ability to remove those in power, as well as clearly see their actions while in power and afterwards, the way of choosing leaders is largely irrelevant. The point is to recognize that all systems are flawed by the very nature of these systems, and thus we don't need to address how these people are voted in or how they are kicked out, but how they operate while in power and how we can keep track of the consequences of their choices. Decentralization of economic power to regions, taxes, small government in general, in percentage GDP terms by any scale, and greater transparency of all financial dealings of government and those in government would greatly increase the likelihood that corruption is drastically reduced. I hope some part of this brief document was of interest, and that I have brought a couple of interesting perspectives to the table for contemplation. I find too much discussion based on how people are voted in or out, and not enough of what they do once there.